All right, so um, back in it for another one. It's your boy. Um, Check this out. All right, so today we're dealing with this very important topic. I figured because I'm having this like come to Allah moment with more science and it not just being this personal thing, but actually being a form of activism. I'm gonna start telling people about it in terms of the context of me bringing myself into a focus with it. That's the only thing I can really do. I'm not really trying to evangelize nobody. I could just lay out why I arrived at the conclusions I arrived at, and then you make the best decision based off, you know what I'm saying, for you, based off the information that I put out in terms of how it relates to me. So, the topic of this talk is, to that effect, more or less, why I identify as Moor, and why Moorish American nationality is a logical, political, and spiritual necessity for our people today. And if you look at nationality, the word nationality, I got it underlined here in blue, because that's what this is. That's what this is. Moor, at the end of the day, is a nationality, and that's what Moorish American really comes around. This is an ethnic identifier. MA, which is Moorish American, is a national identifier. So I just want to, the reason I want to underline nationality is one, because that's what this is, but also I arrived at this before I arrived at this. I understood that nationality was the order of the day, as Noble Drew Ali called it. And that's something I got an understanding of back when I was a Pan-African nationalist. Now, I do not consider myself a Pan-African nationalist anymore, but I do still consider myself a Garveyite. How can I do that? Because the Moorish American, the Moorish National and Divine Movement is inextricably, inexorably a Garveyite movement. But that's a subject for another day's discussion. Now, let's look at the definition of nationality right fast. This is something I have to do a whole nother class also probably on nationality, just to break down what that is and why it's so important. But most of the things that ail us as a people today are impediments to our own self-determination, which is protected by having a nationality. And I'm not just talking about like in an unfair sense, the United States doesn't treat us like citizens. No, I mean literally legislatively, you don't have a nationality. And I'm going to go on to prove that for you. Let's look at this though. In the meantime, all right, hopefully y'all can see that and it's a little bit more readable. Not fun. Okay, cool. All right, so nationality. So this is the Oxford Dictionary definition of nationality. It says the status of belonging to a particular nation. Okay. Number two is an ethnic group forming a part of one or more political nation. Okay, so that's kind of what you would expect for that definition. The archaic definition says distinctive national or ethnic character. The change of a name does not discard nationality. Very interesting that they would put that there as the example definition. Something that's very funny that y'all are probably going to see in this, I guess, discussion we having is what they choose to put as the example of definitions, especially in legal context, is like mad hilarious. Especially when you understand who and what we are and what the great American Masonic secret is. In any case, okay, so that's nationality. Let's look at it from a legal dictionary. This is Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. The reason I use 4th edition and earlier is because 4th edition is around the time of the adoption of the Uniform Commercial Code. That's like the most modern, it's the beginning of the modern era of legislation. So it has that in it, and it also has the older unabridged definitions, which is why people who are into legal definitions, like myself, tend towards, because our country's system of law is by stare decisis, or legal precedent. That means what's understood don't got to be explained. So there's often things in the earlier definition that become abridged or swept under the rug, so to speak, in later dictionary publications. So we try to go back just to find that version of the word, just to find the older versions of the word, which is a good habit to be in, even in terms of non-legal words. Like, the best definition you can have for a word is its etymological definition. It's etymology, because when you have it within its matrix of meaning, so that means all the words that it meant in its history, connotatively and within the context of the society at that historical moment in time, when you have all of that understanding the word, you truly know the meaning of the word, and you can begin to be very precise with your language. Which, once you understand that if spelling is involved, a spell is being cast, and all words are magic words, you understand the importance of that. So let's look at the definition of nationality in Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. It says that quality or character which arises from the fact of a person's belonging to a nation or state. Okay, so that's very similar to what we saw over here. Goes on to say, nationality determines the political status of the individual, okay, especially with reference to allegiance, while domicile determines his civil status. So nationality arises either by birth or by naturalization. According to Savigny, nationality is also used as opposed to territoriality for the purpose of distinguishing the case of a nation having no national territory, e.g., the Jews. That's what it says as an example. So those peoples who are a nation but have no national territory. Now, as I said, this is an older dictionary, and this is before the formal recognition of the state of Israel. But in terms of them as a people, as well as the people who are culturally contiguous or coextensive with this as an identity, that's still the case today, which I guess I'll have to go into at another day. We can't really talk about that right now. Okay, cool. So that's nationality in the law dictionary. So just so we know what it is, it arises by birth or naturalization, and it also determines your political status, okay? So your quality or character, which arises from the fact of a person's belonging to a nation or state. Interesting word, that character word. Keep that in mind. All right, so. Oh, yeah. All right, cool. All right, so, again, this is why I identify as a Moor, and why Moorish American nationality is a logical, political, remember, we already talked about nationalities are political, and spiritual necessity for our people today. Now, that can be broken down into three problems that face our people, and why this, and identifying as this, Moorish American solves those problems for us as a people. Again, I'm not convincing anybody. This is how I broke it down to myself as to if I want to be effective in society based off of what I know about the word and what I believe about governance and history, etc. This is how I arrived at this with people. So the three problems we have are a mental health problem, which is spiritual, a legal problem, which is political, a historical problem, which is a skewing of the truth, which is logical, right? These are three problems that affect us as a people that essentially were things that were damaged during slavery and never corrected, okay? And the reason why you thinking of them as damages is important in terms of a legal context or a lawful context that we're going to look at here in just a second. So again, mental health problem, legal problem, historical problem, and again, nationality is essentially the solution. But the answer then, or the problem then, becomes, but which, right? So this is why I arrived at Moorish American as my nationality. The reason why I didn't just stop at, I mean, obviously, as a Pan African nationalist, I can't just be like, oh, I'm an African, because that's not a nation. That's not a nation state. And human beings within the human family are organized according to nations and nationality. Um, so, in any case, yeah. So to start, I'm going to start over here on a historical problem because the historical problem leads into the mental health problem, leads into the legal problem. So um, let's go this way to start. So the first thing facing us is a historical problem, which is a problem of accuracy and, like we said, a skewing of the truth. But I want to look at how I've arrived at how looking at Moorish science allowed me to a logical conclusion about who we are as a people based off this historical problem and the answer to it within the context of the Moorish national and divine movement. So the main thing that is facing us as a problem is misnomers. We have all these words for us and names for us, like Negro, like Black, like African American, like colored, even like Native American, or to a certain degree and a certain extent, American Indian, a foundational Black American, American descendant of slaves, BIPOC, whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm saying? You can apply these to yourself in whatever way they apply to you, but legally and lawfully, they're misnomers based off of American case law and legal precedent, right? So these misnomers disorient us from the truth based on a culturally biased, disjointed historical narrative. So it's a culturally biased, culturally disjointed historical narrative that gives us these misnomers, which disorient us from the actual truth of our history. So to talk about this, I want to talk about this flag right here. This is the Ruh. This is the flag of Morocco. But the thing about that is the Morocco, as you and I know it today, came into existence in 1956 and adopted this as its national flag in 1956. But this flag was flown by Noble Drew Ali and Moorish National and Divine Movement, the Moorish Holy Simple Science, Moorish Science Temple of America in the 20s. And it was found by various peoples on the land in America who claimed Moor as their distinct type of African descended nationality. And what this flag really means is it's this red canton with this green star. This star is called the Ruh, or the Ruh. This Ruh is also known as the Seal of Solomon. You'll notice on the flag of the state of Israel, it's the Star of David, right? Well, this is the Seal of Solomon. And this Seal of Solomon, the Ruh, is essentially a Muslim, specifically Moorish Muslim, so Muslims of Northwest Africa, who claim their descent from Abraham through the Prophet Muhammad, but also at the same time recognize themselves as the descendants of the people that Abraham himself descended from and or intermixed with in a culturally continuous manner, right? So they do go back to the Prophet Muhammad in their North African ancestry. They do go back to Abraham, but also they are those ancient Carthaginians by virtue of them being in northern West Africa. And because of the ancient Carthaginians' identity, they are the ancient Canaanites, who we know the Carthaginians always recognized themselves as descending from. And they saw Carthage as an appended nation to their original Canaanite, Amorite, Hittite, and Israelite brethren back in the land of Canaan, right? So they are the ancient Israelites via Abraham. They are the ancient Canaanites via people before Abraham, because you got to remember, Abraham, according to their legend, according to their history, as the history as espoused by the Bible, Abraham came from Ur of Chaldea, and came to the land of Canaan. If you look at the story, he was initiated into the mysteries of the Most High by a Canaanite priest king known as Melchizedek, right? And he took on a Canaanite name, taking the Chaldean Abram into the Canaanite Avraham. You see what I'm saying? So they are the Canaanites all the way back to the Chaldeans, all the way back to the Babylonians, all the way back to who these people represented in their antiquity, which would be, if we bridge the history from history into myth, right? So we corroborate the stories that agree on people like Atlantis or cultures like the Atlantean civilization and culture. Then we can say that these people go even back to ancient Atlantis through this symbol and this sign as Moroccans, as Moors. How can we do that? Because the very Atlas Mountains, which are in northern West Africa, which are in Morocco, you know what I'm saying, get their name from the same name that the Atlanteans get their name. So the ancient Atlantides, the ancient Atlanteans, ancient Atlantis are all connected. It was suspected by the people who gave us the name of Atlantis, which is the ancient Greeks. They already associated these ancient Northwestern Africans with that culture that we today in myth, that we've enshrined in mythology as Atlantis, right? So that's what the Ruh, that's what that really is. So that's how, and when you look at those people having been the same source populations, the Moors, because of the way that Islamic nationality worked, wherever jizya or zakah under Muslim auspices was collected, that place was considered a part of the Moorish dominions. So that means everywhere that you and I, as so-called African Americans or Afro Americans, come from in Africa, according to the mainstream narrative, right, or the traditional narrative, is a place that would have been considered Morocco anyway, ipso jure, right? So even if you want to negate the Aboriginal side of Moorish American ancestry, the indigenous side of Moorish American ancestry, through the African side, you're still Moors. You know what I'm saying? So that brings us to this concept of remedy. So that was the problem, is these misnomers disorient us from truth based on a culturally biased, disjointed historical narrative. That's the Ruh, or the Ruh. And from that, we see how we descended from ancient Atlanteans, one way or the other. Ancient Atlanteans, whether historical or metaphysical, or metaphorical, into Negroes, into a modern law, which we'll get into in a little bit when we get to the legal problem. So the remedy for that historical problem is that the word Moor covers all of our ancestry in a way that corrects the historical narrative and therefore our psychosocial relationship to ourselves. The word Moor covers all of our ancestry in a way that corrects the historical narrative. It decolonizes and racicizes the historical narrative and therefore our psychosocial relationship to ourselves, aka healing. You see what I'm saying? So this heals us based off of our psychosocial understanding of ourselves. Psychosocial, psycho being mental health, that's spiritual. Social being legal, that's political, which is going to lead us into that. Once we look at this definition of the word covers right here, is this word, incorporates, is this phrase, incorporated by reference. And in terms of law, incorporated by reference means this. Incorporation by reference, let me go back. Okay. Share. All right, share. Incorporated by reference is a legal concept that allows one document to include the content of another by simply referencing it, rather than reprinting the entire text. This means the reference document becomes part of the main document as if it were directly written within it. So that's what the phrase means at law. And what we have to understand is that's what this word more means in the context of American law. You know how to, once you learn how to establish it properly. Okay. So the word more has within it, incorporated by reference, all these that I want to show y'all, right? So this is from one of my own writs. You know, you could just kind of see what it is. So hereinafter, blankety blank republic is an ecclesiastical Moorish society of private Aboriginal indigenous people of America. We the people are known by many different titles, misnomered tribes, by postmodern European Christian knights of various orders. Some of those titles being, but not, some of those titles include, but not limited to. So this is what I'm saying, incorporated by reference. The word Moor incorporates by reference the following: Moabite, Moor, Asiatic, Atlantean, Atlantide, Phoenician, Carthaginian, Canaanite, Mahurim, Mauvrim, Shimronim, Samaritan, or Israelite, or Ibri, Olmec, Turtle Islander, Asatlani, Maya, Aztec, Amuru, Amexem, Mexica, Iroquois, Algonquian, Montauk, Mohammedan, Muslim, Taino, Arawak, Karankara, Garifuna, Hawaii, Maori, Moro, Lenape, Haudino, Saoni, Cherokee, Aniuia, Seminole, Yamasee, Choctaw, Tata, Chickasaw, Creek, Mississippian, Wachita, Mound Builders, Big Buffalo People, Aniputani, et al. Appropriate personas to jurists to hereby certify, blah, 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 blah. So all those words, all those names, all those identities are coextensive with this term more, based off of not what we said, you know what I'm saying, but based off of how the modern law just so happens to be set up. And if you stay tuned to the channel, I'll get a chance to essentially prove that in another discussion. But at least for this part about Moabite, Moor, Asiatic, Atlantean, Atlantide, Phoenician, Carthaginian, Canaanite, Mahurim, Mavarim, Shimronim, Samaritan, Israelite, Ibri, Olmec, that's all y'all, that's with what we talked about over here already. We all know that that's already a part of the same historical context, and it's incorporated by reference into the word more. That is why the word more, that is why Moorish American nationality, that is why identifying as a Moor is a solution or remedy to the historical problem. So as we said, it changes our psychosocial relationship to ourselves, right? So psycho, that's moving us into the next two problems, which is why I had to start here. Like I said, mental health. We also have a mental health problem facing us as people. You know, how that mental health problem manifests itself is essentially the following. We as a people generally suffer from lapses in moral judgment arising from low self-esteem and poor self-image as a result of post-traumatic slavery disorder. Let me say that again. We have a mental health problem that we are affected and beset by lapses in moral judgment arising from low self-esteem and poor self-image as a result of racism in the modern day and post-traumatic slavery disorder in the past. And anyone who can tell you about traumas, anyone who knows about traumas, psychologists or therapists can tell you that traumas untreated become passed down. They become internalized and generationalized and passed down to future generations, right? And I'm not one of these. There's a lot of people in the Moorish American community, in the Moor community, who believe that slavery never happened. I'm not one of those people. I believe the whole purpose of Moor as an identity is so that you don't have to pick and choose your ancestry, because at the end of the day, we are both African and we are both American. So we do suffer from post-traumatic slavery disorder. We already know that from our own scholarship within our own communities. So slavery for me definitely did happen. I do, however, believe it was vastly overreported and the facts surrounding it were skewed to support a narrative that puts in us a complex of inferiority and puts in others that we exist in the same social space with a false complex of superiority. So this mental health problem, as I said, is also a spiritual problem. And that's how it manifests for us as a spiritual people when we're not taking care of and or have our mental health as a part of our continued, consistent daily practice as a people who are supposedly godly people, who are the spiritual people. To not be consistently engaged with the spirit is killing us and causing mental health. These lapses in moral judgment come from a lack of indigenous spiritual systems, which is also known as a creed or religion, to initiate us into the society, which is what makes one accountable or responsible within the context of that society. And I actually forgot this. When I did the definition of nationality, I did read y'all the dictionary definition, the legal definition, but there's also this. There is there's 5 things that essentially give you nationality, or that constitute nationality. Here, give me 1 second. All right, so just to bring up that definition, the other half is the definition of nationality, because it's very important within the context of us as a people. Yeah, so if you look up here, I actually had to, because it's more subtle and I couldn't exactly remember the name of the book or work, I just know that there was a period of enlightenment where they were musing on nationality. And it contributed to books like The Law of Nations, which contributed to the framing and founding of the Constitution, the writing of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers, Articles of Association, Articles of Federation, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's essentially a 5-category scale that they look at to determine whether a people has a nationality. They have a creed, which is a religion or belief system. They have origin, which is ethnicity or ancestral roots, common origin. They have a common language, so they have a shared tongue. They have common customs and cultures, that's traditions, practices, and folklore. And they have a common historical memory, shared history, myths, and collective experiences. Now, the reason this is important about the mental health aspect and how the lack of spiritual systems, aka initiatory systems, we no longer have systems where men are being initiated as men into their society and women are being initiated as women into their society, because we've lost that, and we literally evolved psychosocially, aka spiritually, to have it. It's damaging us, it's damaging our spirits, it's damaging our souls, and it's damaging our societies. So the lack of indigenous spiritual systems, aka creed, right, is the lack of spiritual systems to initiate us into the society, which is what makes us one accountable to the society or responsible within the society, right? And the reason I brought this up within the context of nationality is because for someone to be considered, for someone to have a nationality, they have to have creed, origin, language, customs, culture, historical memory. What the United States did was they essentially presumed or declared that because they changed, because of the way that slavery was practiced, they changed our creed, aka we did not have a creed, and they changed our language, we did not have a language, and we did not have nationality, right? Now that's 5 pieces, right? If we take away 2, creed and language, right, then you only have 3/5. Now, you remember what the 3/5 clause is, don't you? You remember the 3/5 clause and the 3/5 compromise, which says that they were going to apportion representation as well as taxation within our society, within United States society amongst the states. They're going to apportion it for all free white persons and 3/5 of all other persons, excluding Indians and non-tax. 3/5 of all other persons is you as an Afro-American, as a person who's descended of slaves, a foundational American, what have you. That's how this is where the 3/5 compromise comes from, how they call us 3/5 of a person, because we lost 2 of those fifths based off of things based off their societal actions, right? And in fact, this is very important when it brings us to the legal problem, because we'll quickly realize that, that 3/5 personality is really all we have in terms of the law scape. But before we come to that, let's look at the remedy for the mental health problem in terms of the context of the Moorish National Divine Movement. The very process of study in the Moorish National Divine Movement, even if self-guided, serves as initiation, while the historically contextualized ethos of the Moorish National Divine Movement naturally heals post-traumatic slavery disorder and negritude. So the United States has essentially foisted a status of negritude upon us, and then foisted those foisted characteristics of someone existing in a state of negritude upon us as well. You see what I'm saying? And just the process of what it takes to get your nationality, to get nationalized, to set up your own entity, to set up your family planning, estate, trust, wills, all that stuff within the proper context as a Moor. Just doing that initiates you into manhood, and it initiates you essentially along the mystical tract of Islam, what's known as Sufism. It takes you from initiate to adept, and it takes you from adept to master teacher. You know what I'm saying? It naturally does that, because at the time that the Prophet was alive, he would be seen as like a saint within a Sufic order or a tariqah. You know what I'm saying? Following him, his path, you know what I'm saying, is like how you become initiated, your path to enlightenment, you know what I'm saying? And him as a means of following the path of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Because we do have to remember that Moorish American nationality, though it's not a religion, it does exist within a religious context, because it does have a very pertinent foundational part and parcel religious aspect. So there's that as well. So yeah, so that's the mental health, aka the spiritual problem, and how being a Moor solves that, and why I chose that for us as a people. Or for me as a person existing as one of us, the people, right? And then that brings us to the legal problem, right? So the legal problem is this: we are subject to American legislative injury, but ineligible for lawful remedy because we are legislatively not American, right? So just as I said, the 3/5 clause, the 3/5 compromise, is the only way in which you're referenced in American law before the 14th Amendment. So let's just go through it. We'll go through it. There's dum diversus, which leads to the 3/5 clause and the 3/5 compromise, which is replaced by the Dred Scott case, which is replaced by the 14th Amendment. Now, there is something else in here in between Dred Scott case and the 14th Amendment that's pertinent by omission or tacit acquiescence in terms of the case law, but we'll come down to that down here a little bit in a second. So starting with dum diversus, this is the reason why you often hear Moors say that our ancestors weren't slaves, and why there's so many problems with the status quo historical narrative concerning slavery is because the earliest thing we have on record that affects us in a legislative capacity after the surrender of Granada and the fall of Granada and the treaty of the surrender of Granada, is this dum diversus, which is essentially a legal doctrine wherein the Pope said that, you know what I'm saying, Saracens and pagans could be subjected to any amount of brutality to be converted to Christianity or converted into Christian property, in so many words. So per this, your ancestors were literally never slaves, because this is a declaration of war based upon your ancestral identity, whether that identity be pagan, which is a misnomer of a term in the first place, or they be Saracens, which is essentially what you're calling Muslims or Muslims, or those, you know what I'm saying, born outside of Sarah or without Sarah. Okay, so yeah, as a reference, that's how they called it, as a reference point. So yeah, dumb diversity. So your ancestors literally were not slaves. They were prisoners of war. And because we identify as a slave, which is the only reference constitutionally to this, to the 3/5 clause, that means you're not considered we the people. You're considered really people in the context of the federal constitution. Actually, you're really not. You're actually, your rights as the rights that we the people have are incorporated via the 14th Amendment, which we'll come to in just a second. But the 3/5 clause is essentially what we talked about before. Those 3/5 that got taken away from you by slavery, and you know what I'm saying? This is the only reference to you. That means you don't have access to the Constitution as a trust document, because the Constitution is a trust document. And one of the ways you get your rights protected is by invoking their duties to you in terms of the context of the trust of the supreme law of the land. But if you only exist, because before the 14th Amendment, this is all you have is the 3/5 clause. You see what I'm saying? And because of this, that led to the Dred Scott decision. 3/5 clause is how they had to interpret the Dred Scott decision. And the Dred Scott case was this case wherein they determined that because he was a Negro, a Black, a colored, and African American, provably a law, the 3/5 clause applied to him. He's not one of the people, and not entitled to the protections of being an American citizen. He thought that once he went to a slave state, he would be free, and they tried to sue for rights that only free white persons had. But he only had rights as 3/5 of all other persons, whatever that means. And it was well established in state case law at the time that slaves or property could only have the rights that the state chose to give them, even in their emancipated, not free, even in their emancipated context, they could only have rights that the state chose to give them because they're not humans. They're only 3/5 of a human. You see what I'm saying? So that's why the Dred Scott case was determined the way it was, if you remember the Dred Scott case. All this stuff I'm mentioning in blue is stuff you should go look up on your own. So look up the connection about how Negroes descended metaphorically and historically from the both mythological and historical Atlanteans. And then look up creed and religion and the lack of initiation rituals and the role that plays on the proper well-functioning of a human mind in terms of mental and spiritual wellness. And then you also need to look up dumb versus the 3/5 clause, the Dred Scott case, and also look up the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment is important because it replaces the Dred Scott case in terms of the law as it applies to us as a people, right? At least us as a people under the terms Negro, Black, colored, African, or anything descending from slave, which the word colored does. In fact, let me go ahead and see if I can pull this up for y'all. Okay, I found it. Let me just share this here. All right, here we have colored. By common usage in America, this term, and this is where all Negro, Black, African American, all those come from this term because it's a term of art to describe a type of a law first. It's a type of law that applied to us as a people by virtue of slavery. So by common usage in America, this term in such phrases as colored persons, the colored race, colored men, and the like is used to designate Negroes or persons of the African race, including all persons of mixed blood descended from Negro ancestry. Collins versus Oklahoma State Hospital. But where a state constitution provided for separate schools for the white and colored races, the term white race is held to be limited to Caucasian race, and the term colored races to embrace all other races. And that's only within the context of constitutions providing for separate schools. That's not within the general legal sense of the term colored. It has also been held that there is no legal technical signification to the phrase colored person, which the courts are bound judicially to know. It has been held that there is no legal technical signification. So there's technically no legal meaning to the phrase colored person, which the courts have to pay attention to, recognize, or know. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, so that's what colored means. That's why they ruled the way they had to in the Dred Scott decision, and the Dred Scott decision was replaced supposedly by the 14th Amendment. Now, what the 14th Amendment does, and this is all a part of it proving why we legislatively are not Americans. I've already established that there's no signification. There's no legal signification for the phrase colored person, which the courts are bound judicially to know. So, for proving that there is no judicial standing, no standing in court, no standing in law for the identifying as a colored person. This was done on purpose, and as we've already established, from that basis, any rights that a colored person gets, they only get because the state chose to give them that. Now, supposedly, all the states chose to give them rights within the context of the federal Constitution per the 14th Amendment. But what we see is that the 14th Amendment uses the word persons to perpetuate itself. In fact, it's the second word in the amendment. It says all persons born or naturalized within the United States shall be both citizens of that state and the United States. My computer acting slow, it's trying to show out because we got company. First. Okay. Okay, way down here. Hold on. Let me just look it up the old-fashioned way. Sorry, y'all. Damn. Come on, man. Okay. Sorry about that. I found it. All right, person. A man considered according to the rank he holds in society. Term may include artificial beings as corporations. Okay. Quasi corporations, territorial corporations, foreign corporations, that relate to taxation and revenue laws, to attachments, defining limitation of actions, and concerning the admissibility as a witness of a party in his own behalf. And the opposite party is a living person. Okay, all that being said, persons are of two kinds. Damn, is this it? Oh, that's really crazy. Where is it at? Person, Commonwealth, corporation, law. Okay, here it is. I'm sorry. Um, Corporations are persons, as that word is used in the first clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay. So that means that corporations can be persons in terms of the 14th Amendment, or people supposedly, or persons supposedly within a certain context can be considered persons within the context of the 14th Amendment. That means that the state's rights that you have are equal to corporations within the context of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, this is the reason why the 14th Amendment incorporates the rights of the Bill of Rights within it. If you read the 14th Amendment, it restates the Bill of Rights in the bottom of the 14th Amendment. Why does it do that? If it doesn't need to re-enumerate them within something new that it created. And essentially what happened was so that Lincoln and the Union could compel the performance of the states, they would attach to them through their corporate character and their corporate capacity. So they incorporated the rights of the states because they're creatures at law, and incorporated the rights of Negroes because they don't have any rules or technical signification by which they have to be bound to treat them. And we know that they already have a legal precedent that they can grant them rights insofar as a state or the states is concerned. So the uppercase, all capital letters state, the federal state, provided, it incorporated the rights of private individuals within the corporate federal area. You know what I'm saying? So you can exist as having access to the preamble and the Bill of Rights as one of we the people, as one of the posterity, right? And then a certain aspect of your character as a natural person, you have an ability to participate in trade, to participate in commerce, and you have the ability to participate and forge corporations, right, and do business. So that's called your corporate character. They incorporated your rights within your corporate character because the federal corporation doesn't have a natural person character. It only has a corporate character. So corporations have to do business with corporations. So it incorporated a certain aspect of your character within the 14th Amendment. That means it's on you to go to the courts or to go to some means of appropriate recording or notification to let them know, hey, my ancestors were not slaves. My ancestors were not Negro. There were all of these other things incorporated by reference in the word Moor. And, you know what I'm saying? Because of that, I'm what's known as a preamble person. I'm known as one of the posterity. And, you know, I'm a private civilian insofar as the Constitution is concerned. Yes, the 14th Amendment. This is why in many circles like this, people would try to talk down on the 14th Amendment, act like it's all bad, but it's really not. The 14th Amendment is just as bad as it is good, and that's the reason why it equitably is able to be passed as law. In fact, I would wager that the 14th Amendment is probably passed by virtue of equity auspices through the administrative authority of the federal military government, right? Or the federal military municipality. And that's because it allows you to have your natural personhood protected by your corporate personhood. It literally sets up your corporate character as a armor so that you, the real person, can be protected from corporate malfeasance and corporate arbitrage and corporate overreach. You see what I'm saying? So that's what the 14th Amendment actually does. And if you learn how to leverage it correctly, it can be good for you. That's why Noble Drew Ali said the 14th Amendment is not necessary for the salvation of my people, but you can use it. It's not necessary, but you can use it. Yes, I think I lost my pointer somewhere. Oh, tragedy. Okay, so yeah. So let's stop this screen share. All right, so we're coming on the end of it, y'all. So the remedy for this legal problem of being subject to American legislative injury but ineligible for lawful remedy because we are legislatively not American, we are only 3/5 of all other persons, excluding Indians, not taxed in America, and or we only have rights as given to us by the federal area. Well, the reason that's important as a legal problem is because one, it's not correct. You know what I'm saying? They literally came up and then made up something and then held us to be under and oppressed because of that. But also, like, now more than ever, we see that the federal government and its insolvency is like before our eyes. You know what I'm saying? And one way or the other, we're watching, like, you know what I'm saying, the collapse of the federal version of the empire. You know what I'm saying? So to protect yourself in national terms and to not just rely on the federal government. Like, you don't know what can happen, bro. These people could choose to liquidate you in your corporate capacity and corporate character. And, you know what I'm saying, to put you up as subsidy for a debt that they defaulted on. You know how high our national debt is right now, bro? And the way they can do that is they can liquidate the corporate character as established under the 14th Amendment and hold you as a surety to stand for it, unless you know how to rebut that presumption or correct that in law. And the Moorish National Divine Movement helps you do that by virtue of the opposite of this. So this is law that damns. This is the law that protects and that you can leverage, and why it's prudent and why people call Noble Drew Ali a prophet, because all of these things that he's doing was not known at the time in general time, or had not happened yet, or, you know what I'm saying, was essentially lost to history until subsequent ages of historical study after coming of this man. So Treaty of Peace and Friendship is the longest running treaty of modern mankind. It's a Treaty of Peace and Friendship between Morocco and the United States. And if you look at the Treaty of Peace and Friendship and what it did and how it treats, it actually ended what is known in American history as the period of piracy, or the Barbary Wars, or the period of the Barbary pirates. And those people were lawfully only really called pirates because the United States was recognizing its own claim to the land, whereas much of these people that we were calling pirates were actually standing members of the Moroccan Armada or Moroccan Navy that were defending their oceanic and coastal land claims in the Americas. And that's why the colonies was getting hit so hard for the entirety of the colonial period up until the signing of this treaty. And in the treaty, it essentially recognizes that many of the dominions in America essentially belong to the Moors without necessarily, it gives them that property and those rights and recognition without necessarily acquiescing to the American claim to the landmass, right? And that's really what the Treaty of Peace and Friendship does in one aspect. In another aspect, it is the document that allows the United States to engage in international law and politics. Because it is the first treaty that the United States as a government formally ever entered into. So literally, the Emperor of Morocco recognized the United States, and because the Empire of Morocco was already in league with Spain and France and Britain and various other nations in terms of its treaties, that now gave the United States standing within the eyes of those same nations. And that is something that is very important, as we'll see subsequently. Next, you have the Sundry Free Moors case. Sundry meaning tan or dark skin, sun-dried. So Sundry Free Moors case. They were free Moors and not Africans. Essentially 4 men who of African descent who were able to trace their ancestry to Moroccans and therefore successfully leveraged their identity as subjects of the emperor and or empire of Morocco, and therefore not slaves. So literally, where Dred Scott failed, they succeeded almost 100 or 200 years earlier because they were claiming their Africanity through Morocco. Now, we already proved over here that our ancestors in Africa were Moors or can be availed or claimed as Moors, you know what I'm saying, based off of what this means and how Islamic nationality and citizenship worked at the time, right? Because you could be a Moorish Christian, you could be a Moorish Jew, you could be a Moorish Muslim, and all still be Moors, and still technically, in terms of how you would claim a religious identity today, that would still be Islamitic, because Islamism is the faith, doctrine, or cause of Islam. Okay, so if you want to maintain your religion as a Christian, right, but you want to maintain your identity as a Moor because Moorish Africa allowed you to maintain your Christian identity and afforded you a lot of privileges that many other people who did not have the subject or the benefit of living within Muslim lands had at the time. You know what I'm saying? You could do that. And this is an example of these four brothers who did that. They not only got free, but they also got their wives free. So yeah, the Sundry Free Moors case was very influential in another case that came up after that called Dungy versus Spencer. Now, this might just sound like I'm hitting you with random case law, but you got to, just like I laid out how this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, which is the problem. This leads to this, 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 which is the remedy, right? So after the Sundry Free Moors case, we have the case of Dungy versus Spencer. Now, so the Sundry Free Moors case was forward in the judicial mind of Dungy versus Spencer, as we find quoted by Justice Taney in Dungy versus Spencer. Now, Dungy versus Spencer is famous and pertinent for a couple of reasons. One, it is the case that made Abraham Lincoln famous. It's the case that made him essentially recognizable enough as a name to be able to run for office. When he did. And his leading argument in Dungy versus Spencer, which won the case, was that although it may be a crime to be a Negro in this country, which proves what we were saying about the legal problem earlier, is that literally it's a state of criminality, and therefore criminals, it's a state of criminality, and that has to be, it's a criminal status that you're coming in as, and therefore you don't have any rights except for what the state chooses to acknowledge. So Dungy versus Spencer, that's what he said. That's what Abraham Lincoln argued, is even though it is a crime to be a Negro in this country, it is not a crime to have dark skin. My client is not a Negro. He is a Moor. Moor as in a Sundry Free Moor, someone who is dark skinned and has African ancestry but comes from a noble, free white person stock. Yes, it's racist, but this is the way that the country worked at the time, and this is the way that stare decisis and judicial precedent works even today. So Justice Taney, who was actually the same presiding judge in the Dred Scott case, he gave the ruling opinion in the Dred Scott case as well as in Dungy versus Spencer, wherein he essentially found that Abraham Lincoln was right. It is illegal to be a Negro. And it was at the time before the 14th Amendment, which is when both Dungy versus Spencer and the Dred Scott case happened. That's what he found. You know what I'm saying? Is that because the word Negro or colored has no meaning or signification that the courts of the United States are bound to know. You know what I'm saying? Dred Scott was a Negro and couldn't have his say, and then Mr. Dungy, who was Lincoln's client, could have his rights and maintain ownership of his land and have his rights respected as a quote unquote free white person within that term's meaning in the society. So Dungy versus Spencer and the Sundry Free Moors Act are why the 14th Amendment is not necessary. And furthermore, why in a legal precedent sense, why Moors can have the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Now, before we get to the Moorish Science Temple of America, right here, MSTA, we have to talk about AA 222141. This is essentially a codification of law that talks about judicial powers for consular officers and consular ministers. And it essentially has within it a provision that says that in the absence of explicit consular officers provided by the United States, then the claimants of such treaties must make usage of the common law to enforce their treaty claims if there's nothing that speaks to the contrary. Well, the United States relinquished consular jurisdiction concerning the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. It relinquished consular jurisdiction in 1956. Now, this is a part of the reason why a lot of people call Noble Drew Ali a prophet, is because that consular jurisdiction got relinquished in 1956 so that the French Protectorate Kingdom of Morocco, remember I told you this flag has only belonged to the Kingdom of Morocco since 1956? That's because under permission of the French, an organization was created. A religious organization in the form of a kingdom was created, and it adopted this flag as its flag based off of its arising out of the Empire of Morocco. Well, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship still exists, and it's still the longest running unbroken treaty. And because of what I told you of how it recognized the United States, it's never going to be violated. It's not going to be you know what I'm saying? It's not going to be not a part of it. And because the United States relinquished consular jurisdiction and it no longer provides explicit officers or ministers, then you must make usage of the common law to support your treaty claims if you have it. And because of what they did to us in slavery, it's the smartest political, legal thing in terms of political science aspect. It's the smartest thing that you could do because you don't know, just like they don't know, you don't know which of your ancestors are and are not Moors. On either side of the Atlantic. You don't know which of your ancestors, which of your indigenous ancestors had Moorish descent and which ones didn't. You don't know which of your African ancestors had Moorish descent and which ones didn't. And if we go over there right now, you know what I'm saying? They can't tell you that. You can't even say. So it behooves you to choose something that gives you the highest status in law, which as is already seen, Moor is free white person status, and colored or Negro or black is nothing except for whatever they choose to give you, right? Then why not choose something that gives you rights as a human? Why not choose something that gives you rights as a child of God, as a child of the Most High? So AA 222141 references that. And the reason why people say Noble Drew Ali is a prophet is because before this happened in 1956, he already used the common law to claim the reference to the treaty simply by using the title Moor. The word Moor as a title is found in the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. And the word Moor is what Noble Drew Ali used to reference the people who are the beneficiaries of the religious trust he created, and gave names to which which annex your name back to this and your descent from this. As progenitors, as the contributors to Western culture, as contributors to law and equity as their practice in English common law, as contributors to the Constitution by virtue of the Haudenosaunee Confederation of the Long Houses, and the Iroquois Confederacy's admixture both during, after, and before the period of Columbian contact with Northern West Africans, aka Moors. Noble Drew Ali already did that almost 33 years before. He already set it up for you. And further prophetically, this signed in 2008. So don't ever say Obama never did nothing for y'all, because one thing he definitely did was sign us into UNDRIP, United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People. Notice it says people not persons. 14th Amendment. So, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People says that you have a right to establish yourself along whatever religious and governmental and socio-political lines you need to, and you have the right to self-determination, and you as an indigenous person. Because what you have to remember about our ancestry, the indigenous thing, is that in a mathematical sense, and this is literally in a way that you can leverage, use expert witness testimony, either in living form or in book form, that's already public, depending on how whatever it is published. Only 5% of the transatlantic slave trade made it to the continental United States. Only 5% of the slave trade made it to the continental United States. This isn't conspiracy theory or nothing. You got to go dig through a book to find out. You can Google this. So that means of that 14 million, they tell us 14 million slaves came over in the bowels of ships. Okay. Only 5% of that number made it to the continental United States. And 5% of 14 million, I don't know if you know, is only about 305,000. They adjust for corporate malfeasance. That was to be expected in a corporate enterprise like slavery in the colonial and post-colonial period. You get around 406,000 Africans. So literally 2 to 3 times more Africans went to Mexico than came to the continental United States. Okay, so in a mathematical sense, logically, it would follow that the majority of your ancestry, especially because it's known that the United States had one of the most explosive slave populations in all of Christendom. If that's the case, then it follows logically that the majority of, if the minority is this, then the majority must be indigenous. And if we know that the indigenous persons were enslaved first, we know that a minority of this explosive slave population came from Africa, and we know that they infused African blood with the United States, and the United States was known for having wanton breeding programs. Okay, so then it follows that African Americans are inexorably, inextricably indigenous in terms of their identity. That's what the American means in African American. Then that means you are an indigenous person, and it's your right to set yourself up like this. And because of this, it's your right to set yourself up like this as a Moor. And because that gives you the highest civil standing, literally you become a free white person in law. The Moorish National and Divine Movement is the best way. It's the best way as a form of activism that we as a people can gain true American nationality and avail ourselves of the actual Constitution, et cetera, right? And it's a means of doing better business, of honoring God, of honoring religion, even if you don't believe in an organized religious version of God. It's more harmonious, more biodynamic, it's more radically sustainable. Practice government and governance like this instead of all these controversies that arise out of us trying to maintain this slave-only ancestral narrative. Especially for people who consider themselves hoteps or conscious folk, like, oh, we was kings. Well, this is the route. This is how you can prove it at law and show it historically and prove it at law in a way that doesn't drive you crazy, but actually heals your mental. You see what I'm saying? Let me just pull this up. Let me see if I can find this right fast. Hold on. Okay, I found it. Here we go. So this is SF-181. It's usually provided by the GSA, which is the General Services Administration, which is literally like the corporation that the federal area uses to standardize bureaucracy across all the federal jurisdiction, right? And as you can see, it even says U.S. Office of Personnel Management, Guide to Personnel Data Standards, right? So let's say you were adopted and you thought you were like Maori. You thought you were Southeast Asian, or you were Filipino, like Moro, right? Thought you were Filipino, or a dark-skinned Filipino, or a dark-skinned Malaysian, or something like that, right? And then you worked for the post office. And then one day you found out that you weren't Malaysian or Filipino, you found out you're actually Black and Korean mixed, right? You would use this form, Special Form 181, to correct your ethnicity within the federal area, within federal paperwork as a federal employee, right? So ethnicity and race identification. And I'm just going to go out. So I just wanted to give you that background so you know that this ain't just some piece of paper that I came up with or printed off somewhere. This is probably the most binding federal definition of race that we can really have. So let's look into this a little bit. And this is just to kind of prove everything that I was saying, tie it all together, right? We're going to read American Indian or Alaska Native, right? A person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America, including Central America, and who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. Very interesting how they put that. And who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. That's a very interesting caveat to include. Okay. Asian, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippine Islands, Thailand, and Vietnam. Black, a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific Islands. White, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe and the Middle East or North Africa. A person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Who are the original peoples of Europe? Who are the original peoples of the Middle East? Who are the original peoples of North Africa? Okay? And that's not even really what I'm trying to draw y'all's attention to. That is what I want to draw y'all's attention to in terms of what white means. But did you notice it? Did y'all see that? Did y'all see what happened when we read over that? We seen all these definitions, and one of these definitions is not like the other, right? This says a person having origins in any of the original peoples. Person having origins in any of the original peoples. Person having origins in any of the original peoples. Person having origin in the original peoples. Black and African American says a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. It doesn't say anything about original peoples. Again, person is someone who has, colored person doesn't have any legal designations with the court, which the judges of this nation are bound to recognize, right? And we just proved it that it's still in effect, even in modern day, based off a legal definition. You're not considered one of the original peoples, and you don't have the same rights as original peoples. You don't have human rights, you don't have religious rights. You don't have human rights, you don't have religious rights, you don't have national rights, you don't have private rights, you don't have public rights, except those that the state chooses to give you if you identify as Negro, Black, colored, or African American. And here we have this man, one of the best of us, who in his intelligence, even though he was unlearned and unlettered, in his intelligence had the foresight to incorporate and include these things and establish these things for us so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people right now trying to come up with a means to help our people, and they trying to reinvent the wheel when in fact the most historically accurate, the most healing, and the most legally redeeming and legislatively corrective title that you could have in terms of positive law. You can literally go into court and put all this that I'm telling you on a piece of paper and get a judge to sign off on it. You know what I'm saying? It's the term Moor. It's Moorish American and it's Moorish American nationality. And that is why I'm a Moor. And hopefully this helps somebody find out who they are and their nationality and their ancestry so that they can, stop picking and choosing their ancestors and, so we can get on with the great work of uplifting fallen humanity. Because, this is how we do that. for me. This is how I see that we can do that in a way that's, you know, already going and set up in the best way it can possibly be set up. One, because of whether the ledge is based off our ancestry and Moors, but two, psycho-spiritually because of Islam and our identity as cultural Muslims, regardless, either as Muslims, regardless of whether or not we are dogmatic religious Muslims, one way or the other. You know what I'm saying? Islam is our way of peace, whether or not you identify Muhammad as your avatar prophet. A part of this is why did Noble Drew Ali choose to do that, even though technically, if you were to look at his life from the outside in, you probably wouldn't consider him a Moor. And if you looked at his religious writings, you would probably see it as, many Muslims would not see it as Muslim writing today, even though it is still Islamic and therefore Moorish American Muslim. But that's the topic for another day. In fact, that's the topic for our next discussion, wherein I go into why I am a Muslim, why I'm not just a Moorish American, I'm a Moorish American Muslim, as Noble Drew Ali put it, and why my religion is Islamism within the context of who we are historically and who we are politically and legally within society. So that's me. This is why I'm a Moor. I choose to be more and not less. You know, hopefully you choose something similar for you that gives you the same type of standing and power in life and law and with Allah. You know, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. You know, peace and blessings.